No one comes back to open the door. No one. It's a strange sensation. But my guess is that that's how life often lacks animation. Somewhat numb. A little bit past tense. As if belonging to another season. Yesterday life. Not that I wouldn't agree, but lately, perhaps after all, one needs to appreciate the small things, life's small things. But whose life? And who is to decide what the small thing in life is? Are things for free smaller than things that come with a price? Luxury goods, after all, they are oftentimes quite small, except for yachts and mansions, perhaps, but they are useful in some or other way. So it's interesting to observe how luxury goods almost exclusively entertain excellent positions in regard to secondary markets. One would think that it would be to obtain something that the moment when you have it in your hand, it decreases value in a flash. Like to invest in fireworks and then 30 seconds later it's a poof, gone. Or, in comparison to a diamond necklace maybe, that one can be sure maintains its value for generations to come. Or to go for an exclusive apartment, a luxury condo that the real estate agent have ensured you will double its value in a couple of weeks. Fireworks. Then on the other hand, luxury doesn't really go together with spectacle. It needs to be done with a certain kind of indifference, je ne sais quoi, standing out yet anonymous. Things for free often attract less value, but But somewhere it all flips. Or is that what makes them small? And somewhere it flips. A gift, for example, is after all for free, but can carry a lot of value for the one that offers the gift. It can be connected with strong efforts and even sacrifices. But those values must be put aside, dissolved. The moment when past, a gift cannot be associated with, or assume gratitude or some sort of payback, nor for the person who receives the gift. Can't be in the sense of, how did you know this is exactly what I or that's way too much, you shouldn't have. No, the gift must come with a certain kind of and it is first when the person and the gift develop a relationship, when value is children might be the best and the worst example. They are after all for free, and production value is relatively small. At the same time, life's biggest gift, and they certainly don't come with a return policy. And it also seems like it doesn't matter how many either. It's not like practice wears out the uniqueness of each of them. The small or big have to do something with duration. The wristwatch inherited by the son from his father, inherited from yet another generation. A small thing obtained through choices against life's excesses. Whispering about loyalty and commitment. Duration, and yet holding and presenting life's lack of permanence. A small big thing and a big small thing, connected to certainly moralizing, but also an evidence of continuity, and it's never a middle-sized thing. At some point it was quite comme il faut, but nowadays who keeps a job for several decades? Maybe we have forgotten something about loyalty. Perhaps our society has found its way to a place with which commitment is not compatible. Or maybe it's just capitalism that has grown so greedy it can't even offer us frequent flyer card holders a gift towards the end. She gave me a kiss. A kiss can be a tiny thing. But a certain one can determine a life, or two, or several. And then after that first one, we couldn't stop. And they still, it's that first one that pays the bills for all the following ones. And then at some point, it faded. We stopped. Perhaps we got bored, started to sleep with the back to each other. Perhaps we grew self-conscious and worried about bad breath. But what happens to a kiss then? Does it end up in some form of malignant inflation, or does the rare kiss still exchanged increase in value exponentially to be something big? God welcomes us all. His house is open for everybody, sinners and criminals included. On the door there's a big sign saying "Tout est gratuit." There is no entrance fee. And then you're supposed to develop your relation with God. Cultivate your relationship with. But isn't it slightly strange then when it's for free, at the same time we tend to get annoyed, irritated, even pissed off when he or she or they, when they don't appreciate our prayers. When we don't feel heard, when we don't experience that we are being seen. But we are aware that for free we can't expect some form of remuneration, some form of revenue or payback or even warmth. It's not exactly rocket science that there's no interest rate on for free. And everybody knows a Luna Park with a fat entrance, the Ferris wheel will be bigger, and the haunted house will be more cinematic and high tech. But when it comes to God, it seems that we seem to overlook that slight predicament for free. But does that mean that your relationship with God and faith is a small thing? A small relation with a big thing? Maybe it would be better if it was the other way around. We learned as kids in school and so on that God is big and encompasses everything. How could it be otherwise? But perhaps it would be better the other way around. A big relation with a small thing. That it was our commitment and our devotion that carried the small thing, kept it alive and gave it its élan vital. I can wait. I can wait. She asked me to hold her hand. It must have been towards the end of May. To ask for one's hand to be held can be a really small request. For the one being asked, next to nothing. Of course you can. Why not? Let's try. But for the one asking, it can be connected to a big effort. To overcome shyness and muster the courage to face a possible rejection. And evidently, the response can change two lives to come. A child who slips its hand into mine. Innocent, hardly noticeable, and each and every time something immeasurable. As a gesture, something so small. And as a gift, something incredibly big. Hold on. And something I must take on without the slightest consideration in respect of responsibility or morals. But I can wait. I can wait. At the end of the fence. Nor responsibility nor morals can wait. In fact, they're really not good at. They might even be the opposite, the exact opposite of that. But I can wait. I can wait. At the end of the fence. Is waiting a small or a big thing? For the bus, it's usually not very long, but it can be felt like a really big thing. For love, one can wait forever, but it mustn't be a big thing. It can't be understood as an effort. Certainly not a big effort. I mean, if it's love, and then it's not an effort. And if it is an effort, felt like an effort, perhaps it's nothing else than a bus being really delayed. But then when that waiting that must not be an effort, but a little bit whatever and done with ease, comes to an end, does the size of waiting change? From big to small? Or is it like, that was that, let's move on? Or, you've been waiting for me, said by the person being waited for. As if waiting really was an effort or an evidence of endurance. As if waiting is something something competitive almost. Oh, only 2.5 years. Yeah, well, that's hardly nothing. Maybe anticipation have something to do with this as well. And then there he or she is. What happens with the time of waiting then? Until your return, I have counted the days, the hours, even minutes. I have, with closed eyes, lain sleepless, wondering, longing, worrying, and fantasizing about the moment when we will be reunited. But what happens? What is that time now when? What are those feelings and emotions now when they must be nothing? When you have returned, they can have no value. Still, the only thing I had when you were away was the waiting and the anticipation of you coming back. Waiting was what kept me alive. An interesting, curious twist. Moments when waiting waiting resonates of passivity. Waiting by definition or something. Maybe not exactly by definition, but waiting a little bit by definition is the opposite of suspense. Suspense is when postponed time is undulating, crisscrossed by rivers and creeks, canyons and pathways. When time is interlaced, cracked like dry earth after an extensive drought, and every moment is charged. That's suspense. Waiting has nothing of those elaborations. No gaps to look out for, no intervals to overcome. No, it's not that waiting is out of focus. Au contraire, all the dials are perfectly calibrated and technologies are super sharp. It's just that there's no details, nothing that occupies. Perhaps that's why people tend to have a cigarette when they are waiting for the bus, to reinstall the lack of details. Smoking, or actually the activity, in fact, is a form of disavowal. Smoking, a little bit like Forrest Gump. Smoking implies to substitute details with manufactured ones, even though knowing that that's precisely the function of the cigarette. But is details an obstacle or an asset? Is the amount of details that makes something big, or are details something that ensures that something is small? That's a detail we really didn't need. But are any details necessary, or Or are they the details there to ensure that possibilities are still at hand? Details is a means to postpone permanence. There is definitely a difference in between voluntary and involuntary waiting. And then when the person that has been waiting with a soft voice and in a smooth way tells you, after all the time I was waiting, how could you? How do you respond to something like this? That must not be. Then the waiting really was an effort. Maybe it's not the moment when you ping-pong the comment back with a, didn't exactly ask you, did I now? I don't know. Perhaps involuntary waiting is the same as grief. Or maybe grief is that specific form of involuntary waiting when you can't stop waiting even though you know that the waiting will never come to an end. Grief is waiting without destination. Grief is life in which details have been veiled. You can still sense them, but see them, but through a thick veil, through a haze, as if you were wearing really thick winter gloves. Ghost details, perhaps. For every moment lived, an amount of future is subtracted. Young people, I don't know if they possess it actually, but young people, they have more futures. To come to terms with aging means to welcome and befriend the inevitability that sooner or later you will run out of future. It's kind of beautiful to think about. Oops. my stack of futures just came to an end. Oh. Right now I just turned the page. I just turned the last page of my book of futures. And I'll stay put here. I'll hold the fort while you move on. And you pursue your futures to come. But then what happens to unlived futures? What happens to the futures of those who died prematurely? Maybe what we call ghosts. Are the futures of all those who weren't allowed to see their stack of futures come to an end? Of all those who ran out of energy to be able to turn those last pages of their book. There is one thing that isn't and can't be allowed. Even when asked kindly. One thing. There is one thing that can't be, to which we cannot ask for permission, however kindly, however often I asked. And that is to skip over a part of the futures that you have been assigned. Although I asked ever so kindly for so many times, to impatience, I guess, precedes the moment of coming in terms with the fact that your futures are not infinite. And then that moment on the phone with, well, who? But when are you coming? When are you coming back? It's not going to be long now. I'll be there in 2 days. But I can't wait. I really can't wait. What a weird thing to say. Although, of course, it feels good, but it's very strange. And at the same time, you ought to. I mean, even though everybody obviously know that you can wait. You really can wait. You won't die or disintegrate. And if you did, the waiting would be in vain in the first place. Actually, it will and cannot not be a delight to wait, because what you're waiting for is an extraordinary someone or something. And if you don't wait, if you don't wait and can't wait, it's as if you are indifferent or don't really care. An intricate twist. Those moments when waiting grows and grows, when it outgrows big, like when you are waiting for the outcome of a job interview, or perhaps the result of medical tests, when waiting becomes so painful, even a negative response will be a relief. Or when you're waiting for a crush to show up at a date, and in 0 seconds, waiting is transformed to awkward silences and interrupted conversations. It's nothing personal. But I believe I would prefer if you were a bit more late. Because until you arrive, until you show up, you and I, we are perfect. We remember the first kiss. Maybe not the first, but more or less a few or many, couple of first ones. That one behind that surprising one, I really didn't see that coming. And then that one. The one that I had been waiting for. For so long. That I had longed for with my entire body every moment of the day and the night. Some one or two that was a little bit disappointing, maybe mostly because of oversized expectations due to a bit too much vivid fantasizing beforehand. And then that one. And then that one. That wasn't long and not delivered with particular intensity. And yet that one changed everything. We remember the first kiss, but I wonder, will I remember the last? I wish the distance or the journey between my last kiss and my last breath will not be long enough to get lost. I would very much appreciate if life could allow me that the time between my last kiss and my last breath, that time will not exceed the limits of remembrance. We say she outlived her husband with 20 years. But do we maybe also then say she endured life for 2 decades without a joy, without that gentle sense of pride? Of placing a kiss on the lips of the one she loved. Or for that matter, to feel that moment of surrender when being kissed. I'll be there in no time. It's going to be 2 days. But I want it to be long. Because every moment when I wait, it fills me with a gentle glow. It's like, it makes me brand new. And I feel like freshly brushed teeth the whole day long. And sometimes I stay in that state as a form of whispering. Masochism was perhaps not the wording I was looking for, but the peculiar enjoyment of deliberately subjecting oneself to doubt. And where or maybe one could say, in many and quite prominent Christian cultures, grief is carried by the individual. We go through life together, but when it comes to grief, you're on your own. So I'm not an expert, but there's something unfair, I would say, something somewhat maybe stingy, that that at the very end of life, as the very last thing we do, we are supposed to appear in court to be evaluated and judged by God. We don't have to believe in God, but Christian ethics has that, so to say, inscribed. So there we are. One would think that a generous God would skip that part and just forgive and forget. Actually, not forgive, just forget. Forget in a cheeky, sort of under the eye way. I know that you know that I know, but I will anyways forget. Because to forgive is still to acknowledge that something might not have been exactly like desired or up to standards. The father, the parent who offers the child, maybe not the child exactly, but a more grown up, that offers the kid alone, even when having the assets and having no intention of using them. Especially when in connection with the comment, you have to make yourself worthy. Really? And then especially at the end of life, as the very last thing, you have to make yourself worthy. How is it that one says, you live and you learn, but you learn from your mistakes? That is not a healthy ethic. Or maybe it's not so much better. You learn from from the things that you forgive. First, I need you to acknowledge that you did me wrong. Then perhaps I can. Or, I will forgive you, but only after I have seen you suffer the consequences of your actions. Poof. Think about people who are proud of their own ability to forgive. That swim in the self-righteous appearance of forgiveness. to forgive, however humble, is still an engagement in power and domination. So, rectification, what an awful something. And deep, and also very proprietary. To forgive cannot maintain itself as something private. It needs to forgive is not it's not something in between two people, like, can you pass me the salt, and you receive something, or no, it's two individuals deliberately letting go of their compartmentalized selves that give up a sense of pride and privacy. To forgive is to practice a form of commons. Maybe until 1776, but after that I feel like forgiveness has really been on the Trans-Siberian capitalism, and the ETA has been eternally postponed. And you know what? Even before it managed to find its correct coach, it swapped forgiveness for transaction. Forgive became for transaction. That terrifying moment when forgiveness speaks, and what's in it for me? Or the moment when you try sincerely to ask for forgiveness, and you're denied on the basis that you just want a good deal. But I need closure is another of those, at least to me, American. Who came up with that? What a terrible therapist. I need closure before I can forgive, perhaps. Closure is an awful relation to reason. I need to understand. I need to be able to understand. I need to be able to follow causally, step by step, and then perhaps I can. But that's a very, very, to me at least, is a very regulatory understanding of loss and grief and trauma. It's the only thing we can do to put something behind, to make it come to an end, to be done with it, to package it and wrap it up and put it in the department of erosion. Maybe there can can there be forms of coexistence where hurt and joy can find a habitat together, which is not a matter of bumping into each other, but a landscape where things can support, and things does not have to be straight and linear, and where things are not about a matter of making it easy. To forget is not simple. Because forget cannot be active. Forget must be practice without determination. In many ways, it's much more complex than forgetting, especially for Americans, lol, because there's no transactions involved. Forgive is oftentimes practiced as if it's coming to an end. That's that. But forgetting is something else. It's an engagement with movement. A kind of a form a concentric movement through which details, elements, irritations, affects, and other part from each other until a certain moment when semiotic coherence is lost. There it is. It never goes away. But moves instead of overcoming the importance of maintaining something clean. So that the open scar continues to be a happening. To forgive needs to happen in two steps. First, you forget, and then you must forget to forget, and both without determination. It's only after the second step, when you forget what you have forgotten, that I free myself from forms of exchange of guilt. Once I told a friend, or maybe it was more of an acquaintance, I don't know exactly, but I can't remember the context or why, but it was at a party, and I I told this story about a guy who had a child in the same kindergarten as me. But before I had even arrived halfway, the acquaintance sort of turned to me and said up to way too close. She almost screamed, "Yeah, he just wanted attention." And then she made clear that the guy, I think she even called him the dude, was an absolute loser, and me too, who had bothered her with such a mediocre stories. I didn't say anything more. Not because I didn't want to, but because she had already started up an apparently much more exciting conversation with somebody else. But the guy who had a child in the same kindergarten, not really an artist, but a person from the creative sector. Sometimes he showed up in one of these fluorescent jackets, that city cleaners and garbage handlers are obliged to wear, sort of too orange or whatever, an identifiable color, if color is even something one can associate with. And of course, attention would be the first option. How could it not? I mean, here I am, very much loud and clear. But through fragments of exchange that never became really any proper conversation, the guy informed me, or maybe he more let me understand, that it was something very different. For him, the jacket, when you put on the jacket, he became invisible. It was like, from the moment when he put the jacket on, the only thing, everything was about the jacket, and he disappeared. Even if the jacket was the perfect size. For him, the jacket offered him a form of anonymity, and a form of anonymity, certainly without its more violent tendencies towards proper invisibility and regulations. He could, after all, still pick up his child at the kindergarten. But something was different. Those days, it was as the person who picked up the child had no content. It was a human that picked up the child. Not this or that human, but just human. I mean, of course, we can understand his position as privileged here, but he knew, he acknowledged this, but it was something else. It was something very, very different. And I wonder to be anonymous, is that a small or a big thing? The common understanding, I guess, is that anonymity is somehow subtracted. Something is taken away. Freud would maybe say that it has to do with lack. Maybe in fact it's all Mark's fault. At home, off hours, spending time in nature. You're a person and you have what do you call it, agency in regard to your personality. Whereas at work you're not the person. You're just one of countless interchangeable anonymous workers. On the other hand, maybe one can also regard anonymity as the moment just before possibility. I mean, in the sense of before being identifiable as possibly this or possibly that. To be anonymous is to live a moment where all possibilities and all impossibilities are lived at the same time, all the time, but without continuity. Anonymity is like this, the calm before the storm. It's like the moment just before something starts to pick up speed. It's neither explosion nor implosion. It's more like it's without prefix. It's just plosion. The moment something becomes possible, necessity is crossed out. Possibility is not necessary. It's exactly possibly this or possibly that. Anonymity, however strange it might come across, means to become necessary. But not necessary this or necessary that. But whichever necessary, and all necessary all the time. It's just necessary. I can wait. I can wait. I really can. At the end of the fence. Possibility. Possibly this or possibly that. Possibility because it never ends. It goes on, perpetuates. Possibility is the opposite of being real. The absence of being genuine. To become anonymous is to become real. Maybe that's why maybe all of us are a little bit scared of city cleaners and garbage handlers, because anonymity doesn't concern itself with possibility, doesn't ask for a choice, this doesn't offer a proposition. And therefore, anonymity, therefore I'm drawn into the experience of my own possible anonymity, my own possible erasure. But anonymity has nothing to do with being erased. It's the other way around. Anonymity is about becoming full, completely full, fully completed, and without the need of any kind of choice, especially not any form of choice in relation to anybody else or some, in relation to especially not in relation to something or somebody else. But I wonder, is possibility smaller or bigger than anonymity? Maybe since I didn't make the choice, I wonder, is possibility smaller or bigger than anonymity? Some say one doesn't choose love, but that it's the other way around. Love chooses us. Maybe since I didn't make the choice, didn't decide for this or that, to love isn't a matter of possibility. Because if it was chosen for me, love is necessary. To love is to simultaneously encounter the bliss and the fear and the bliss of one's possible anonymity. Love has no reason, only necessities. So when I say I love you, I'm given a small, perhaps even just a little, I'm given a small interval vis-a-vis possibility. It's pretty remarkable, isn't it? That to love possibly the most personal thing we humans do is at the same time something that doesn't and can't belong to us. To love implies to give oneself up, to renounce one's personhood. The I that love you both is and isn't me at the same time. Completely me and fully not me at the same time, all the time. If I had a reason to love you, wouldn't that be, if there was a rationale or a form of justification, wouldn't that be somewhat disappointing and melancholic? I love you as long as you would not color your hair red, or as long as you don't bring your pet turtle over, and mind you, please avoid garlic. Love reflects only itself. I love you because I love you. I love you because. And as long as I do because. Love is necessary and perhaps even objective. And if love is not my choice and can't be, love can also not be private. The courage of love is to give oneself up, make oneself available and become public. Does something become more true if expressed with a loud voice? My father used to say, especially in the car, let's speak lowercase, no screaming, just tiny, tiny letters. Or does the truth gain prominence when whispered, when expressed through a whisper? I mean, everybody knows that a secret that is whispered in somebody's ear is much more secret. A truth, if it is in any regard properly true, cannot be dependent on volume. So one wonders, why hold her when a whisper is enough? A truth is necessary and has nothing to do with possibility. A truth, therefore, doesn't belong to anybody. It's not even ours. A truth is independent of us humans and our lives, big or small. But if truth has nothing to do with possibility and is necessary, and if love is necessary and has nothing to do with possibility, if truth is necessary and love is necessary, doesn't that mean that love is true? And I can wait. I can wait. At the end of the fence. When time is active, it becomes relative to the activity. Time engages and becomes about something, but not itself. Activity is time's forgetting itself. It is at this moment and time it becomes possible, possibly this or possibly that. Active time. But does that not mean that waiting time withdrawn from activity, that waiting equals the experience of time itself? Waiting is time turned on itself, made self-referential. I'm wondering, is that time becoming objective? So waiting is the experience of objective time. But maybe the opposite is also true, that Waiting is when time becomes fully subjective. It becomes pure experience, so nothing else than subjective. In particular, since it doesn't stand in relation to anything else. The cigarette then becomes a means to give waiting a relation, and thus waiting doesn't feel particularly is easy to overcome. But if waiting, on the other hand, is objective, there's no need for a cigarette, because then anxious anticipation is exchanged for a stretch of contemplation, a form of letting go and become one with the absence of activity, become anonymous. I can wait. I can wait. There at the end of the fence, and no one can show me the way. There's no doorman, and no one comes back to open. But maybe it is already open. It's just that we have grown so accustomed to there being doors that we have forgotten that forgiveness and openness is something completely different than to be open and forget. Forgetting and openness, after all, are being looked after, whereas to be open is to share dressing room with forgetting. When we hold hands, even just casually on the street, does it necessarily have to signify belonging and communicate confirmation through which together is strong? Perhaps holding someone's hand can equally function or exist as a means to stand together, however little we have in common, because we are just human. And together doesn't mean that we have something. Even though I don't know your name, or maybe exactly because I don't, we can hold hands open without forming bonds. To hold hands, to offer oneself or ask for one's hand to be held, implies to give oneself up, to surrender and depart from transaction. To allow oneself to stand together with the hope that is spelled forgetting. And there's no details there at the end of the fence. No details that bring us together or keep us apart. And things are what they are there at the end of the fence. And I can wait. I can wait. Which, however, is far from anything neutral. Perhaps even it's another of those moments that can't be forced. And yet, exactly because those moments can't be forced, are necessary.